Hello everyone, I'm Janine Kakmar with PHTV Channel 4 Palos Heights, and we're back with our show all about books. As many of you know, we have discussions on the show about books, authors, and writing, and then we get to visit with a guest. And today, I'm so thrilled we have a very special guest. Many of you know him from his work in Channel 4 in our community, and as head of executive producer of Channel 4 here for the past 18 years, Ron Jankowski. So Ron,
thank you.
Thanks for coming out today. Ron, I didn't know about Ron's other life before you came to Channel 4 until I started volunteering with him here. And his story, his professional career before he came here is it's like reading a thrilling novel. His story includes working with the CIA, living with the resistance fighters in Cuba in the 60s, working with NASA in the Apollo space program, heading up NBC in Chicago. I mean, on and on. And when he would tell me little bits about his life, I'm like, I feel like I'm reading a novel with there's spies and revolutionaries and dynasties. And so I was just amazed to have somebody like Ron with such a background as Ron working and living in our community that I wanted to share Ron's story with you. So thanks again for being here, Ron.
Thank you for inviting me.
Good.
I'm going to enjoy this.
Yes, me too. But before we get to all the gory details, or all the good details, we're going to start talking about books first, okay? So September is a great month for new releases. In this show today, we're going to talk about 3 new books coming out by some 3 very important authors. And our first book is titled The Sea Prayer by Khaled Hosseini. And many of you will know this author by his earlier books, The Kite Runner, The Thousand Splendid Suns, and The Mountains Echoed. And he was moved to write this book as a response to the heartbreaking experience he had in the current refugee crisis. He wrote this deeply, beautifully illustrated book for all ages. He was moved to write this book when he saw the images of the 3-year-old Syrian boy Alan Kurdi's body wash up on the shore on a Turkish beach back in September 2015, as was the rest of the world. He was haunted by the image of the boy, but also by the thought of what the family must be going through, which is one of the reasons why he writes this book as in the form of a letter from a father to the son before an extended journey. He pays tribute to the families, the millions and millions of people whose lives are splintered and uprooted by the force of war and persecution. And he will donate all the proceeds from his book to the UN Refugee Agency and to the Khaled Hosseini Foundation, which helps to fund the life-saving relief efforts for refugees around the world. Our second new release is Leadership in Turbulent Times by Doris Kearns Goodwin. And many of you know her as the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of the nonfiction book she wrote about Abraham Lincoln and his cabinet, The Team of Rivals. And if you haven't read that book, you could put that on your reading list. It's a fascinating book. But in her new one, she takes a look at 5 decades of presidential history, and she offers an exploration into the early development, growth, and exercise of leadership. And she attempts to answer the questions, are leaders made or are they born? Where does ambition come from? How does adversity affect the growth of leadership? And does the leader make the times or do the times make the leader? And in attempting to answer these questions, she takes a look at the lives of 4 presidents: Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Lyndon Johnson. And she tells the story of how all of them collided with dramatic reversals in their lives that disrupted and even threatened their ambitions forever. But they all managed to rise up to the occasion and fitted in to confront the dilemmas of their time. And in today's polarized world, these stories of authentic leadership in the times of fear and uncertainty take on an even more important relevance. Our third book is The Escape Artist, a band of daredevil pilots and the prison break of the Great War by Neil Bascom. Now, if you recognize that name, he's the New York Times bestselling author of The Perfect Mile, which was a story about the race to break the 4-minute mile. And if, again, that's another book to put on your reading list. It's an excellent story. In his new book, this is a spellbinding story of the downed Allied airmen who masterminded the remarkably courageous and ingenious breakout from one of Germany's most devilish POW camps, the Holzminden, which was kind of a landlocked Alcatraz that housed the most troublesome escape-prone prisoners. Its commandant was Karl Niemeyer, who swore that nobody should ever leave that prison. But the author draws on never-before-seen memoirs and letters to bring this narrative into a cinematic life, which talks about the British Empire and the darkest, most savage hours of their fight against Germany in World War I. At turns, it's a bit tragic. At turns, it's inspirational, a little bit funny, but spellbindingly suspenseful even. It's just a little-known story about the biggest POW breakout in the Great War. So now we'll take a look at some of the New York Times bestsellers. These are books out by authors that many of you know already. The first book coming out is by the Emmy-nominated writer for his hit TV series The Wire, George Pelecanos, and he's out with a new title, The Man Who Came Uptown. The world's most beloved detective, Hercule Poirot, is back in a stylish thriller set in 1930s London. And the title of the book is Agatha Christie's The Mystery of Three Quarters, written by Sophie Hannah. Transcription is out. It's a dramatic story of World War II espionage and betrayal and loyalty by the New York Times #1 best-selling author of Life After Life, Kate Atkinson. And the mystery writing duo of Charles Todd is out with his Forgotten Place. I'm excited about this next one, the Cormoran Strike book. This is the private detective series written by J.K. Rowling. Yes, she's the one who wrote Harry Potter. She also has a private detective series called The Cormoran Strike, and this is the 4th book, I believe, titled Lethal White. If you haven't read the first 3, you need to read them. A Dark Tide Rising is the newest on the William Monk series by Anne Perry. Clive Cussler's new one in his Oregon Files series is Shadow Tyrants, and novelist Hank Green has on his new one an absolutely remarkable thing. And that's actually what we're going to talk about next, an absolutely remarkable thing. We just talked about our books, and now we get to visit with our guests. So Ron, thanks for being patient and sitting here. And for those of you who just tuned in, Ron runs the station here at Channel 4. And typically, he's executive producer. He's been here for 18 years. And typically, he's sitting in the back. He's watching the lighting. He's listening to the sound and watching the camera, the whole picture, and making sure everything's running up to his expert expectations. And so he's not accustomed to sitting in the guest chair, are you, Ron?
No,
okay.
Not at all.
Okay, so
this is a real switch for me.
Right. So, but as I mentioned in the beginning, Ron's professional career has, before he even came to Channel 4, really has the sounding of a thriller. It parallels the stuff we read in thriller novels, where he worked for the CIA, he worked for NASA, he worked for NBC. I mean, so your professional career is really fascinating, and I want to just like to go back to visit some of those moments.
Okay,
is that good with you?
Sure,
All
that'd
right.
be fine.
First, so let's start with the CIA. How does someone like you, Ron, get started with the CIA?
Okay, first of all, at the time this all happened, I was working for ITT. I was working on a military project, and there were many military projects going on. I just happened to be in charge of one project.
So this is back in the early 60s?
This is back in the 60s,
Okay.
yes. I found a form on my desk when I came to work, and I didn't know what that was all about. Went to my boss, and I says, "What's this?" He says, "Everybody's got one. Look around, you can see that." He says, "So fill it out." So, okay, I filled the thing out, and I turned it into him, and I saw everybody else turning it into him. But when I was filling the form out, they were asking me questions that were very unique, but I always seemed to fill that uniqueness. My background, my interests, what I was doing at ITT at the time. And so they were interested in the electronics part that I was involved in, my management skills that I was as a project manager.
Okay.
So I filled out the form, got it turned in. A week later, I got a call up to Human Resources, and I thought, oh boy, what's going on now? And I thought my project was failing, something was wrong. I went up there, and there was two gentlemen in dark suits sitting in the office along with the HR person, and they said, we were reviewing your form that you filled out, and we want to discuss that with you. So they asked me a lot of questions about what I was doing specifically, and I shared it with them, and they said, well, we're going to end this by telling you we're interested in you doing a project if you're interested in making this little switch in your life. And I said, okay, what is that? And they says, well, we're with the CIA. We don't normally do this. President Kennedy is interested in doing a project, and he needs specific people. And you happen to be one that we're interested in with your background. So I says, well, aren't there others? And they says, yes. They're either too heavy in engineering or too heavy administrative, and you seem to fit both. So they made an offer to me to work with the CIA, and I did not know what this really meant because I'm like in my 20s and I'm looking, oh yeah, this is exciting. Well, okay, so it's exciting. So they said, we want you to fly to Virginia, and we're going to brief you, and we'll go from there.
Yeah,
so,
did you get any certain training for that? Or?
Well, yes.
Okay.
When I went to Virginia, Langley, they pretty much told me everything that needed to be done. They told me how to do it, so I was there for several days. And next thing I know, I'm being flown to Titusville, Florida, and that happens to be where Cape Kennedy at the time is what it was called. There's a small airfield there, so we flew in there and waited till the evening, and then the Navy took me to some island, don't know where is this, is in the Caribbean. Next thing I know, we're in Cuba, and we're at the south end of Cuba, near where the Bay of Pigs are. So we
this
enter.
is the mid-'60s. So yeah, so
early 60s.
Early 60s. So this is a turbulent time in Cuba for us.
Very.
Yeah, for those of who didn't live back then,
yeah,
it's very tense times.
Well, there were lots of things going on. The Kennedys at the time, President John Kennedy wanted to see if the resistance could take over Fidel and take over the island. And
you were you were living with the resistance, is that right?
I was asked to live with them to gather information, and of course the information that we were gathering, not only was it weak, that they really did not have the force that they needed, but my job was to gather all that information that I could. I wasn't on the streets buying and selling and doing anything in the streets in their business streets. I was in a home by the resistance, and I just gathered information from them. What was also going on is Khrushchev was bringing missiles in and setting them up facing the U.S., so that was another issue. Then the Kennedys wanted to take over the island. They wanted the resistance, rather, to take over the island. Well, all of a sudden, we were there for a few months, and we were told, get out. And I couldn't understand why we were leaving. They said the project's scrapped. To save your life, you got to get out. So I was told where to be at a certain time. They picked me up.
In the cover of night, right?
In the cover of night. With the Navy, they took me out, took me to this island. I got back to Florida, and then they flew me to Virginia again. I was debriefed in everything that I gathered. Well, I didn't gather that much. First of all, I'm a new guy on the block. I'm trying to learn everything. And I thought this was kind of scary because I was waiting, after I was there for a while, I was waiting for the door of the house to be open and military stand there with machine guns and either take me out or take me as a prisoner. I didn't know at the end what was going on. Well, the resistance was too weak, so they told us to get out. The President Kennedy decided to scrap the whole project. So we gave him enough information that Khrushchev was bringing in missiles. So that's another part of it. It's another whole other story. It's another time, another year. In fact, I think that was sometime in '62 when all that was going on, when Khrushchev was really pushing to do something and expand his nuclear power into Cuba. So that's how I got involved with the CIA. That's the information I gathered. I relay that, and then I just thought, I got to get out of here. This is not good. My life is could be ended at any
Yeah.
time.
Didn't they
And
ask you to stay on?
they asked me to stay on,
Yeah.
and they agreed. Here, I have a young family.
Yeah.
I'm in my 20s. I have 2 children. One we were hoping to add on to our family, and I'm explaining all this. And so, bottom line was, they don't do this today anymore. Believe me, they let me go.
Okay.
So I did come back, and they gave me another project in the U.S., and that project was to put a phone in Air Force One. And
This is the
be
Air
part-
Force One that the Kennedys were
yeah,
flying
the
around.
Kennedys were flying, yes, and they wanted to have communication with Khrushchev, with Russia.
And that's when they're relying on your your education in electronics.
Electronics and be able to keep the project together and make sure everything was on schedule. And not only was I part of it, but there were several other people, because the installation was not my deal. It was getting the components for this phone built and up to the point of the plane, and then there was another team that would get it installed and get it working. And the communication at the time, the communication at the time was with MacDill Air Force Base. I think they still are, the central. I'm not sure about that, but they were at the time. So there was lots of other teams that were working with me. I was not the sole person.
Because you said that Cuba was jamming our signals, right, at that time?
Prior to that, they were jamming our AM stations, like WGN, WMAQ, WBBM. Their signals were being jammed, and so you would hear static and all kinds of weird noises. They were not successful in that, but they were enough to be a nuisance.
And so that kind of led that they wanted some sort of communications on the Air Force One.
Yes,
Yeah.
so he could talk. And of course, it did work out because there was some challenging going on. I think it was sometime in October of '62 when Khrushchev sent some more ships loaded with missiles, and we surrounded them and said, you're not going past our blockade. If you do, there's consequences. So eventually, after about a week or so, several days, they backed off, they turned around, but I think we wanted them to dismantle all the missiles that were in Cuba at the time, and that eventually happened.
Yeah. Speaking of the missiles, you also had some work with the Minutemen silos as well, if you can talk about this.
Well, they gave me another project, and that was all the communication with the silos that were from White Sands, New Mexico to Vandenberg Air Force Base. And there were many missiles that I couldn't share. I don't even know if it's classified anymore, but my job was to make sure that my voice is going, just a moment.
We'll take let Ron have it. But he talked about the Minutemen silos were the silos that are
Active ICBMs in there.
yes, right, so that we would be ready to
Do whatever.
yes.
And I think we still are. I think those silos still exist. But anyway, that was my job, and I had several. And when I took the project over, there were a lot of parts that were not sent to them on time and what they were doing with different project silos, and I made sure I cleared all that up. So they were very happy with me again.
Okay, so you had so there was the CIA. So what does one do after the CIA? And then what you started next on your resume is NASA. So it's like, how does you make that jump?
Well, this is an interesting thing, and I don't know how it ever happened. I was working, and my phone was ringing. I was talking to my boss at the time, and my phone was ringing. He said, "You better get it." I forgot how he was kidding me about it could be your wife having a baby or something. And so I grabbed the phone, and the voice at the other end said, "Ron, you don't know who I am, but I would like to discuss you relocating from the project you're on to the Apollo space program. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Sure, I would be."
Just like that?
Yeah, we would like for you to interview for it. You have the basis of what we're looking for as far as background and experience. So I did go and interview. I went to a company called General Time up in, I think they were in Wheeling. They were in Rolling Meadows at the time. I interviewed there, talked to the person that was running all the projects and the manufacturing portion of it. And he said, I remember him saying to me, tell me how you would track this project. And we're talking about a white room environment. So
meaning what does that mean?
Means you're wearing a white smock, a white cap, and booties when you walk in. You don't have street clothes on when you walk in.
Okay.
And all the components that were there were many projects going on. When you walk in, your project had 2 or 3 people assigned to it, and they were welding tiny, tiny little welds, putting components on a printed circuit board.
Okay.
And that made a module. The module got encapsulated with some special resin material, and then when that was finished, it was tested, and then it was put into a valise with foam around it, and then it was up to me to find a way to get that chain of custody, not lost, down to Cape Kennedy.
Did they handcuff it to your arm?
Handcuffed it to me, the valise was, and it was uncuffed there, and of course they retested
So
it.
you traveled from Illinois,
Chicago, get on a plane. So it got to the point where I had many people reporting to me. So I would go and say, how would you like to take this down to Cape Kennedy? And we'll set it up so you could take your wife. You could just pay for your wife's ticket, and you guys could stay down there for the weekend. So, I mean, we're paying your ticket back, but just get for your wife. So there were a few that agreed to that. So I didn't have to take it myself. That's how ridiculous it was at that time.
Yeah.
The environment of working was they owned you. You work the hours you
For NASA.
have to support NASA's schedule.
So, I mean, what was the point? Why was this so secretive about that? Why did they have to handcuff it to you? And
Well, it was chain of custody to make sure that nobody was fooling with it, but because there were some tests going on with the Apollo and they burnt up. They never left the ground.
Okay.
The missile got off maybe a few inches and it actually burnt up. So they were concerned about someone either having hands-on doing something to it.
Okay.
They just wanted to make sure that from point to point they could account for where this capsule was at.
Now, was that for the lunar excursion module?
That was also, yes. A friend of mine who I see periodically, we both worked on that module. And lunar excursion module was a module that a spaceship would go up, a rocket would go up with 3 astronauts. 2 of them would dress up in their suits and leave the mothership and go on to this LEM module, and they would rocket to a lunar atmosphere. I'm calling it atmosphere for lack of a proper word for it, to get to a certain point of where the telemetry wants them to be, and they would shoot a portion of that module off to go around the moon.
Okay.
Then they had to rocket back to the mothership.
Okay.
All was successful.
Okay. Now, this is prior to any man's walk, and nobody walked on the moon yet. This is all early
Yes.
NASA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Apollo 11 was the first manned flight. It was Apollo 11 that took him up there. So I was involved pretty much up to that point, and shortly after that, I just couldn't do it anymore because I was living there. I was living with the project, and that's what's unfortunate about it. The President Kennedy wanted someone to walk on the moon, and of course that was and be the first, and that was so that he could show Russia with their Sputnik they're inferior. And that was the whole idea. That's why everything was on such an accelerated basis.
Right. There was a book out just recently about the 1968 space race and how they made their goal by Christmas. They wanted somebody to, walk on the moon, and so what NASA did they just crunched it. Everything was crunch time.
Yes.
Like the deadline they set, they were breaking all things to barriers and everything to try to get that to happen
And do it safely.
and do it
and
safely.
bring the astronauts
right.
back.
Exactly. Right. Because for the success rate of that. What do you remember most about working with NASA and that?
Well, I didn't have hands-on, but my friend and I, his name is Rich, He and I saw engineering drawings coming to us, and we had to take those engineering drawings and incorporate them into manufacturing a product.
Oh, right.
And he took care of all the engineering changes. There were lots of changes. They kept modifying and improving, and I mean, just every week there was something new. And we had hands-on the componentry that went on the LEM module, so that's kind of personal to me.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned when you were at the museum in Chicago.
There's a mock-up unit there.
Yeah. Was that something you had worked with?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So go to the museum and you could see a little
Yeah,
bit
it's
of.
there. I think it's on the second floor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a science and industry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they owned you. That you had no time for your family. NASA, meaning NASA. You decided to leave.
Yes, I actually quit.
Okay.
I just told I couldn't do it anymore. One day I came home and I told my wife, I remember it so vividly, I walked in the door, she was ironing, and I said, I really need a drink because I got something to tell you. I quit. I can't do this anymore. And
That's a brave decision.
Yes, with a family.
Yes, because that's a very, I mean, when I look back in history, because, do you want to drink? When I look back in history, the time, that was like it's an incredible time period where there's so many new changes, new technology, and to be part of that I sometimes might think it would be hard to walk away from, but yet on the other hand, when you're not, you don't ever see your family and the price of that.
And I was always tired. I never had enough sleep.
Okay.
And I think I told you about a trip home one night.
Oh, yeah.
I was driving on Route 83. Now, this is in the 60s. Route 83 had lots of trucks, two-lane highway, no lights, very little traffic.
You're driving back from Florida?
No, I'm driving back from Wheeling
Okay, right.
to my home. At that time, I lived in Worth. So I'm driving back, and I was so tired, and this happened to me so many times. I saw this truck stop, and I pulled in a truck stop, and I pulled next to a truck that I knew they probably were. It was a truck stop where the drivers would eat and whatever. And I pulled up next to him, and I shut the engine off right next to the truck, and I lay down in the front seat of my car, and I fell asleep so quickly. And I'm thinking, hopefully, when they start this truck up next to me, it's going to wake me up, and then I can just continue. And that's what happened.
Uh-huh.
They got into the truck, they revved the engine, whatever, and I looked up and thought, oh my gosh, how long is I was sleeping there for about an hour.
Uh-huh.
So I got back behind the wheel and drove off. And of course, I was telling it to my wife, and she was like, hysteric. Are you kidding? You could kill yourself. Well, yeah, but it's time for me to leave the job.
Yeah.
It's time for me to find something that's 9 to 5, that I'm home with my kids.
Yeah.
And that was becoming more and more important to me than anything else.
So how did you find your next stuff? You went to NBC then, correct?
Actually, I didn't. My old boss, ironically, that first week I took off, called me and said, it's ironic, I get all these communications.
Yeah,
It's always
the
out
phone
there.
calls.
He called me and he said, Ron, there's a job that they want him to take, and he says he interviewed for it, and he says, I got another offer, it's better, why don't you take a look at it and see if you might be interested in it. So he told me about it, and here's the person to call about it. So I called, I got the interview, got hired. And it was Gaylord Products, and they were the inventor of the hairpin.
Okay.
Like, I don't know how many years, in the 20s or whatever it was. So I started there, and we merged with another company, and I had to move the plant down to Danville, Illinois. We were in Danville for about 5 years. And Danville, Illinois at that time, Saturday afternoon, all stores were closed. There was nothing open.
Okay.
So we had, it was a huge adjustment for us. We just had a problem with that. Our kids now all went on to college, and we thought, maybe we should move back to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing we did, because my wife's father was very ill, and unfortunately he had passed away. We were in the process of moving back.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were trying to move back, I saw an ad in the paper, and one Sunday I'm looking in the Tribune. Back then, there was no computer.
Right.
There was a classified.
Right.
and I saw major network looking for someone. I forgot the exact title, so I sent my resume in, and within a week I got a phone call that they were going to send me tickets for a plane flight. It was a small airlines, and you won't believe the name of it. Whatchamacallum
That's
is
the name
the
of it?
name. And I'm sure if someone sees this from Danville, they'll know what I'm talking about. That was the airlines.
Whatchamacallit? It sounds like the candy bar.
So they flew from Indianapolis to Champaign. They had a little circuit that they flew.
But you were going to New York?
I was going to Chicago for an interview.
Okay.
So I flew there, and that went like gangbusters. And I have to tell you why they even called me.
Right.
Here's this Polish name, Jankowski, living on a street called Poland Road. Well, they thought that it was a riot.
Okay.
So everybody in the office area knew about my resume, and they had to meet me. And then when I went there, went for my interview, they said, "Do you really live
I thought you were making it
on
up.
Poland Road?" And I says, "Yeah." They just burst into laughter. They said, "That's the reason we even called you."
Oh, my God.
You're this address and your name triggered. And then we started looking at your resume, and well, of course, you fit in very, very nicely. So then I had another trip to New York for another interview, and came back, and then they hired me.
Okay. And that
So,
they meaning?
I mean
NBC.
NBC Television, WMAQ TV.
Okay.
And
you hired as you what? How'd you start?
I started out as director of purchasing because they had some issues with the way the procedures were, and there were people taking advantage, financial advantage of WMAQ, and they asked me to go through audits, and I did, and I proved what I needed to prove, and we let a lot of people go, and we hired new people, and I got it organized, and at the time this was all happening, corporate called and said, we would like to make sure Chicago's doing their share with the minority community, that you are giving proper contracts to them. And I looked at them, and we were giving them contracts. But those people that were in business were more in the cleaning and that kind of business. So I looked very, very hard at the whole project of what they were trying to do. And I gave all the cleaning projects that I could to minority companies. They had to be minority owned. And I had 2 or 3 that were all in competition, and I usually end up signing a contract like for a year, and then I would rotate that. And as long as the prices were the same, I rotated through the community. And so I kind of got a lot of recognition for going above and beyond, and I eventually worked myself up that I was running NBC. I had all the responsibility, less the newsroom, less the news anchors, of all the engineering and the technical end and the purchasing of that, the leasing, all of that was under me. Security, everything basically was under me then.
And then what about the new building then? The new.
Well, at the time that I was growing very quickly with NBC, RCA owned NBC. RCA decided that they were going to sell to General Electric. The RCA wanted to have an asset, a building asset in Chicago. So we worked with Equity Insurance, and they owned a lot of property, and so we, with lots of attorneys and real estate people from NBC, agreed that we were going to purchase property and build this high-rise. Well, GE came in and said, no, we don't want to own a business, a building here, but we want to be charter tenants. So everything got changed.
Oh, wow.
It was really hectic at that time, but we switched that around, and we continued building out all the things that we wanted to. We put the Peacock at the top of the building as it is today. And I was trying to develop the NBC Tower that was built in, I think, 2 years. The tower had enough room for all of radio and television in Chicago. I figured out the space that was needed,
Oh, wow.
and they could fit in there. So I started going out and talking to radio station directors and owners and so on. And I had a few radio stations that were interested. At that time, Channel 44, I'm not sure they're even in existence anymore. They were interested in moving over. Telemundo is a major
Hispanic.
Hispanic TV network, and they are down in Mexico. They wanted to move up in the Chicago area. I was trying to connect them. And then GE said, you know, we want to cut our costs. So anybody that's near retirement, we want to offer them a package. So I took the package.
And that was in the early 90s?
It was in '93.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So and at this point in your career, you're ready to retire? Is that?
I wasn't ready to retire. I was only in my 50s.
Okay. So you left NBC and you're going, and then
I left NBC, and I kind of just took it easy for a year. And my son, who is a police officer with Orland, said, "Dad, I think they're going to be looking for someone for chain of custody and evidence to build up a program. And so I think you need to talk to the chief." So I did, and brought my resume, talked to him. They hired me, and they walked me down into the evidence room. And
this is in Orland Park?
Orland Park.
Okay.
Yeah, they needed a lot of attention. And so I said, I think I could create a system, and I could probably train the officers what they need to do, because things were really not packaged and cataloged right. So they hired me. I told them it'd take me a year. I was there 5 years.
Oh boy, it's kind of funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it's like, what do they have done with all that stuff? I mean, they were just letting this evidence build up in a room.
It was building up, and nobody was doing anything with it.
Yeah.
Now, they didn't have anybody in the room.
Right.
So police officers were bringing it in. So once I cleaned it up, I had a chain of custody. I had documents to prove where it came from or where it was going. And then I had to have one of the ladies that was in the administration talk to county to be on top of who's being released from incarceration, and when they were released, to get the material out and get it to them, because everything's starting to explode. You know, we had so much stuff.
Yeah.
And then the stores didn't want the merchandise back after it was stolen.
Ah, okay. So then, and then you were telling a story how you were taking car rides to Joliet or whatever with evidence and stuff that you didn't really want to have in your car. And
well, and I did have to, for fingerprinting and drugs. I had to take to Joliet their crime lab, and I could only take it, sign for it, deliver it to them, and they had to sign for it.
Sounds like your valise.
Excuse me.
Sounds like the valise handcuffed to your arm again.
Almost. It was in the car and sealed in the bag.
Right. Different cargo, of course, but then, so now are you retired?
After 5 years,
yeah,
I was reeking from drugs and trying to dry out marijuana plants before I would take them. I mean, the place smelled so bad.
Right.
So I would come home and my wife would say, "Oh my gosh, take your
You're
clothes off."
You're going to get arrested.
You know, take your clothes off in the garage. Don't come in here with them.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, and I thought, you know, it's time for me, I think, to leave. Unfortunately, my wife had passed away during that time, and when that happened, I took another year off.
Yeah.
And then there was a position open for volunteerism here at Channel 4. I saw
because you're retired now.
I'm retired.
Okay,
I'm at
you
home
were
watching
retired.
TV.
Yeah, living the life.
I'm watching TV and I see this picture of a camera on, and I think it was the mayor or somebody, but nobody was talking. And I said to my wife, "What is that?" I got remarried 2 years later, so
Right.
I'm jumping
To
again.
Sue, right?
And I said to Sue, "What is that?" And she says, "Well, that's the council meeting." I says, "You got to be kidding." So she made the phone call here. I came here for a meeting, and they asked me to stay on.
Okay, and that was almost 18 years ago. Ron had retired, and 18 years in your retirement, you have increase this place of?
We went from one camera to, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Yeah.
9 cameras.
So Channel 4 has really grown since you started 18 years ago. What's the radius of the signal now?
Well, when I first started here, the signal was going to Comcast, and it was in Palos Heights.
Okay.
That's basically how it started out. And I had an idea of talking to Comcast to see if our signal could be wired to other towns. And they told me there would be a convenient wiring at no cost to us to include Hickory Hills, Palos Hills, Worth. There's some parts of Palos Park
Yeah.
that get Comcast, and some other areas that are fringe on Orland Park did get Comcast.
Okay.
Our wiring, our signal.
Okay.
And so it includes those towns, and of course with Palos Heights. And then our signal now goes out to AT&T UVerse, and that signal starts northern part of Indiana and goes all the way up to McHenry County
Wow.
in Illinois.
Wow.
Now, the AT&T executives told me that there is over 1.5 million viewers if they want to watch Channel 4
Wow.
with AT&T.
Okay.
Now, Comcast, I would say we're in the neighborhood of a little over 10,000 viewers between all of these towns of Hickory, Palos Hills, Worth, and Palos Heights. So the signal has expanded, and how that happened was when I talked to Comcast, they says, yes, it's a go, but you would have to get agreements, intergovernment agreements with all of the mayors of those towns. So I did. I talked to Mayor Strauss, and he said, that's probably would be great for the town for economic development.
Sure.
So with that I just pursued it. I talked to all the mayors; they were all interested in it. We created a document, and I sent it to Comcast, and they accepted it, and so they switched us. So we are now our signal goes to all these towns.
Amazing.
So with that, I asked each mayor to supply us with a person to cover their town, and that was kind of exciting to them, but they just, for some reason, could not get people interested to get on the air and carry a camera and stuff like this. So we are still covering, like Palos Hills, we cover Moraine Valley College. We do a few other things for them in their rec center. And Palos Hills mayor comes into our studio and gives the news for his own
Nice.
town.
Okay.
And then, of course, Mayor Strauss here in Palos Heights does the same thing.
Yeah.
So we're hoping that eventually all these other towns are going to have the same thing here.
Wonderful.
But we're very capable of having them come in and doing their thing, whatever they want to do for their town.
I mean, it's really. I mean, it's incredible that our community, Palos Heights, and the other surrounding communities can have, to take advantage of your expertise and your all the expert. What's the word I'm looking for? Your knowledge that you have over all these years from all your incredible jobs that you've had over all these years.
Well, when I was with NBC, I learned what the game was to sell airtime. I learned the game as to how to efficiently manage your department and set it up and buy the right equipment and buy it so that you're not buying the most expensive, you're buying something that really fits the need of the station only. I just carry that same experience and that knowledge here. And when I first started out here, we had some very inexpensive consumer level equipment, cameras. Did not last very long because we were trying to do a lot in Palos Heights. And I had to hope that when we made this deal with these other towns, the subscription to Comcast would give us some fee, and they gave us a 35-cent subscription fee. It's called a PEG fee for us to buy capital equipment, cameras, lighting, whatever. So when that money started coming in, I just started expanding this thing as fast as I could.
Oh my gosh.
And one thing is the studio. I mean, we have 6 or 7 sets in the studio. We've got 3 cameras with teleprompters, and they can switch in every which direction, and within an hour, we have a new set.
Yeah.
We couldn't even think of that back, 10, 15 years
Yeah.
ago. And we've got 6 cameras in the council room for the mayor's meetings. We can cover anything in any angle. So with all that money coming in, I was able to expand and keep expanding. But it wasn't only me. I have Carl Gurman, that's an engineer that helps me keep equipment updated. We have staff that's running the cameras right now. If it weren't for them,
Yeah.
I couldn't do this. This wouldn't be what it is.
Right.
It's this team working together, being dedicated, and are all volunteers.
It's amazing.
Isn't it though?
It is, very so. And I don't even want to mention this, but you just turned 80,
Yes.
because age doesn't matter. But that he's at 80 years old, and you're still and you're going strong, and it's amazing.
I have no thoughts of stopping right at this moment. There's so many things I still want to do with Channel 4. We can expand on. What I'm driving Channel 4 to do is transparency of government, provide awareness to all the residents and businesses here in town, and economic development. If I can help businesses do better and give them exposure, I mean, that's what this is. That's what the station should be doing, and that's what we are doing. I want to expand on that as much as I can. And I must say, in conclusion to this, without Mayor Strauss, without his council, with all the aldermen, without the city administrator, Dan Nisovic, this would not be possible. They allowed me to do it.
Talk about a team, right?
Yes.
What a great team.
Yes.
And what a great team we have to bring this show to you. Ron, I know you aren't used to sitting in the guest chair, but I'm so thankful you're here. You really do have an incredible story, but more importantly, you're just an incredible person. And to share your wealth of knowledge and your experience with people like myself, who just, I don't know what I'm doing when I come to this show, but you, under your tutelage, you help me, you help other people with learn things, you help our community. So on behalf of that, thank you for all that you do for us and for in the community, and thanks for the team that you manage. We're so thankful to have you here. So thankful to be part of your team.
Well,
So.
and all I can say is thank everybody in return for allowing me to do what I'm doing.
Absolutely. And thank you all of you for watching. See you next time.